Avenue Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information.
Good morning, Guam, and thanks for starting your day the KUAM way group chat Tuesdays. Man, it's been a great run with you, Mel. This is our 8th Tuesday doing discussions on decolonization.
It's gotta be like a record or something.
It's great. And you know, I wanna kind of switch gears next Tuesday. I was thinking about looking at homelessness but I do want to bring you on because I know you guys have that study that's
Yes.
and that's going to be a lot of great info.
Yeah, definitely. And that we're working on the study is being finalized, and so we're hoping to have it released this year.
Right.
And obviously it's going to be an academic exercise, and it's going to be a very thick and intense, comprehensive study. Is what it's meant to be. And so part of our plan to help make it be a valuable and useful tool for our community is that we're developing kind of like media translations for it, so like a highlight reel,
right?
So that people can access
Cliff's
it.
notes.
Yeah, exactly, Cliff's notes, so that people can access it a little bit easier and understand it a little bit easier, but obviously also be able to reference back to the study.
Right on. And so we wanted to talk citizenship today.
Yeah, citizenship.
Which is one of the big issues that people talk
absolutely.
about.
Yeah.
When we discuss decolonization and political status. People go zero to, we're going to lose our U.S. citizenship real quick. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great place to start because I think before we talk about citizenship, it's important to kind of talk about some of the myths around the topic and also some of the ironies about the reality of our current citizenship. So I think you're right. People really do go 0 to 100 real quick on citizenship. And I think the common misconception is that decolonization equals losing your U.S. citizenship, which is not entirely true. I mean, it's a possibility, but again, that would be something that we would determine ourselves. If we want to do that, then obviously we'll do that. But
I mean, the way I look at it, just maybe an oversimplification, but we sit down with Uncle Sam and it's like, okay, you want to keep your bases here, give us X amount of money, we want to keep our passports. I mean, something like that. I mean, as an example.
Right, and that's a reality, I think, and that's something that we definitely should dig a little bit deeper into. But
also on a side note, wouldn't you want to see a freaking Chamorro passport? Wouldn't that be so awesome? I mean,
it would be awesome. You get to design
woven,
yeah. It's gonna be made out of nipa, but only harvested when it's in season.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, so I think when we talk about citizenship, the first thing we got to do is understand what are the realities of our current citizenship. Yes, we are U.S. citizens, but I think that we also have to figure out, okay, what is citizenship, right? Citizenship is about membership, it's about rights, and it's about participation. I mean, just in a nutshell, that's the realm of it, right? Now, if we think about our citizenship, we have in some ways membership, we have some rights, and we have clearly less participation.
Right, and I often think, when you grow up and you start to get woke to these kind of things, I was always thinking that we should be U.S. citizens with a little asterisk because the citizenship that we have is different than the citizenship that, someone in New York State has.
Someone in the continental U.S. or in a member of a state has a different access to rights than we have, and that's there's this term coined statutory citizen versus a constitutional citizen. And so being a citizen of the United States, what it does is it gives you the full protection of the Constitution. Right? Now, if we understand our political status and how it impacts our citizenship here, even though we are U.S. citizens, we were given our U.S. citizenship differently than other U.S. citizens in the continental U.S. and the states. Right? They are what they call constitutional citizens, which means that their citizenship is rooted from the 14th Amendment, right? And so there's
from the source.
Right, from the source. Whereas our citizenship was granted by Congress through statute, through the Organic Act of Guam. And so, and that's different. It's very different. And I think, part of it obviously is one of the things that I think more people know about is that, because we are a territory, the territorial clause says that we will only be applied to certain rights under the Constitution, certain protections under the Constitution.
I mean, can you imagine that constitution that would read like, you would be given certain inalienable rights and freedoms, but no, just a few.
And that's I think that's the big thing, right? Is that we're seeing that there's a clear difference between a member of the Union, right, a member of the United States versus a territory. And so there's this concept of just soli versus just sanguinis. So just soli is the right of the soil, just sanguinis is the right of blood, right? And so for us, we are extended the right of the soil because we are America's soil, politically, right? And so this is a really interesting concept because what it basically means for us is that it's more so that this place has the right to the citizenship versus the people here. Whereas if the people in California, it's not so much just it's part of it is the soil, but also
no, I mean it is because if someone from here goes to the States, then you can vote for president, and I see the geography.
Right, and then there's also the real interesting aspect of it, where oftentimes U.S. citizens in foreign countries have more rights than U.S. citizens in the territories, and so the right to vote, for example, you can still vote for president if you are a registered voter from California and then you move to Italy.
Right.
If you retain your citizenship, right, and you retain your voting rights. Whereas if you move from California to Guam, in this territory, now you can no longer vote for president. And so in a lot of ways, the citizenship, I think it's ironic that your citizenship gives you more protection, more access to rights in some cases in a foreign country versus in a territory. I think it says a lot about our current status. And I think the other thing that we need to note about this is that our status is our citizenship is very fragile. It's a lot more fragile, I think, than a lot of people imagine. I think a lot of people take for granted that our citizenship is just a guarantee. It's inalienable.
I mean, if they can make it, they can break it.
Right.
And that's basically what they
now
do.
For a regular U.S. citizen in the States, they lose citizenship voluntarily or by committing treason or something, revoking denying their own citizenship or renouncing their own citizenship, by maybe claiming allegiance to another or serving in another country's military, for example. Whereas for us, it doesn't work in the same way. Like we can lose citizenship by having it taken from us. And the interesting thing about it is that it's kind of like it's almost like a coin toss. We never know. Sometimes the court, and it really depends on the federal government, the interpretation of the courts. In some cases, they'll say, these rights are inalienable, and whether you're in the States or in the territories, you should have access to these rights, these protections. And then in other cases, the court rules opposite, that, this doesn't apply because you're in the territory. And so it really just depends, and there's no one, it's not just one way or another. It's not black and white.
Right.
And I think that's a thing that we all have to recognize about our citizenship and how it really differs from the citizenship of a member of the Union.
Right, and so how do you, that's a hard task to kind of push that narrative, because a lot of people are just under the assumption that, because they said we're citizens, that we're just getting all this stuff. And so in a way, it's almost like you have to kind of dress down what citizenship means on Guam. Yeah, and
I think that, a lot of people, you hear people say this often, right, that people on Guam are second-class citizens, and that's where that term, that perspective comes from the reality that we do have certain rights and privileges as citizens, but there are other rights, like participation, that are clearly denied from us or clearly withheld from us. And so, for us to understand it in that way, I think the important thing is that, we got to understand the realities of our political relationship. And that's ultimately what determines, what rights we do or don't have. And so, for us, it was the Organic Act of Guam in 1950. For Puerto Rico, it was the Jones-Shafroth Act of 1917. And it's very they're very similar in a lot of ways. The Organic Act, at that time in 1950, it was a blessing for a lot of people because, our people were living in this very
they saw
ambiguous
it as a stability
status.
And a turn of the page.
But it was a double-edged sword. In the same breath, it also legalized the federal land taking, right? Because by making us U.S. citizens, it then opened the door for eminent domain, which allowed the federal government to basically acquire like half the island. right? And its first
Right.
initial military buildup. And so without that, right, without making us U.S. citizens, that would have been designated a war crime to just outright take land from people of a foreign country, right? Now, and so for in the same breath, we have to recognize that the Organic Act of Guam, fast forward to 2020, is the thing it's lynching us. I mean, it's really the thing that has got us all kind of in this really precarious situation.
Right.
And it really affects our political autonomy. And when we look at the Organic Act of Guam, it was never meant to be a permanent solution. It was really just meant to address citizenship, and then we had to take action to move forward politically. But there's been obstacles along the road, obviously, and I think that now that we're here, I think we can recognize that the answer is not that citizenship doesn't just answer all of these problems.
Right.
And that it's more than just being a member. We also need participation, and I
Right.
think that's really the impetus for decolonization.
I know we're talking citizenship and you're keying in on the participation, but another relevant point is, there's just so many programs that the territories, we just get the short end of
I'm
the
glad
stick.
that you brought that up.
Veterans
Right.
affairs. I mean, you can just go
Absolutely.
on and on, right?
Medicaid, Medicare, yeah.
I mean, how many times you hear about some program that the federal government's doing, and then, does that apply to us, or and it doesn't.
Right. And I'm glad that you
Or
brought
we
that
get
up.
it in some limited half-ass form, right?
Absolutely. And citizenship really is meant to be kind of your ticket in, right? It's meant to be this is how you access these programs. This is what gives you the right to have these programs, to have access to these programs. But it works, but our access is different in the territories versus the states. Medicaid, Medicare is a great example of that, right? In the territories, we operate under a cap.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter what the impact is, what the bill is for us, and a lot of it is not just us, right? Like, we absorb the Medicaid, Medicare costs of our neighbors from the freely associated states, right, as part of their compact negotiations. And so when we absorb those costs, we should be reimbursed, right? We are on some level, but it's at a cap. There's a ceiling to it. So they will only reimburse us to a certain amount.
Right.
And then everything above that is on us, right? Whereas in a state, the cap is there is no cap. And so it's based on a formula, right? And I think that's a great example, is that for us, what we're experiencing as US citizens is a limited amount of access to these federal support programs. And so we pay dues just like anybody else, right? I mean, we pay dues in a different way, but obviously we are still impacted by American policy and law and everything, right? And so, we should have equal access, but we don't. And so, when we think about citizenship in that way, even non-U.S. citizens from the FSM, right, are in other words, are really having more access, more protection and cooperation with the federal government, support from the federal government than us as U.S. citizens. So we are clearly impacted by our political status, and citizenship is not a guarantee that that we're going to be treated equally as other U.S. citizens.
Right.
And it's really just because of the political status of the territory. The Harvard Law Review was quoted as saying that in a century of case law, no federal court had recognized birthright citizenship as a guarantee in unincorporated territories. And I think that says a lot,
Harvard says it.
Yeah, right. Harvard says it must be great. And so, when we think about that, right, that means that there are no guarantees, right? Birth is not a birthright for us. I think it's clear that because we were given citizenship through a statute versus the Constitution, it is clear that it is not an equitable relationship. And that's really what decolonization is all about, right? Is that we are trying to create a more equitable relationship with whoever it is that we're going to deal with, be it the federal government or another country. And so when we dive deeper into this, right, and we start talking about political status, obviously if we were to become a state, I think the transition is fairly simple, right? We kind of get grandfathered into this idea that now citizenship is a birthright, and we will have equal access, and equal protection under the Constitution.
We're gonna get Disney Plus.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, we're not gonna be told that Disney Plus is not allowed in your country. Now,
sorry, it's not available in your country. We're not in the country.
Yeah, what country are you in? Are you in the U.S. or U.S. minor outlying islands or the U.S. territories? It's always ambiguous.
Right.
Is this international or is this domestic? And so when we think about free association, right, there's examples of there's a varying degree of examples, right? You have one in like the FSM who decided, like, outright rejected this idea of dual citizenship, right? But they still have, because of their negotiations with the federal government, they still have access to a lot of the rights and protections.
Friends with benefits.
Yeah. And then you have a case like Palau, where they have a dual citizenship, right? They have a Palauan citizenship and a U.S. citizenship. Now, this could work. I mean, it could happen either way with Guam under a freely associated model. Now, the same thing can go with an independent model, right? An independent model.
This is what I want to key in. So, independence, are you going to say that it's possible that we could still emerge with the U.S. citizenship intact?
It's possible, but ultimately that would obviously, kind of like what you alluded to in the beginning of this conversation, that would dictate the negotiation, because what you're doing in that case, I mean, it's real similar with like the CNMI, right? The CNMI, when they negotiated their political status, they're very clear from the beginning that they wanted U.S. citizenship, and so what that meant for them is that they knew that certain things were going to have to be on the table, and that's something that we're going to have to deal with, right? So we would have to negotiate under that premise that what is the cost of the citizenship? And so we would have to play ball, you know, and figure out, okay, what is this citizenship worth to us? What are we willing to negotiate with in terms of our, you know, political autonomy, or just the landscape on Guam? Is it going to be the amount of land that the military bases take up? Is it going to be the amount of exercises that they're able to or not to conduct? Is it going to be affected by our, you know, foreign policy negotiation? Who knows? But I think the point is that you're right. Yes, you're right. In any model, there is always a possibility that U.S. citizenship remains.
And because when we started this episode, there's just so much fear out there, and people just go, you know, decolonization, you're going to lose your passport. And so I kind of wanted to show that it's possible, if that's what you're into, to hang on to the citizenship and all of the status options.
It absolutely is.
I mean, people ask me, like, well, are we going to be able to keep our passports or whatever? And I said, well, do you want to? And if the answer is yes,
I think it's also important to know that
tell somebody.
The U.S. passport is not what it used to be. The U.S. passport is not the most powerful passport in the world. There's got to be like at least 8 in front of it. It is. It's true. You know, there are a lot of other passports in the world that have access to more countries than the U.S. passport does. It's just the truth of it. You know, the U.S. passport is not like the giant that it used to be. Now, that's not to say that we should just, you know, disregard a U.S. passport, but, I mean, you know, I'm just thinking realistically, pragmatically. Look at the Palauan passport. The Palauan passport take you anywhere a U.S. passport take you.
Right.
You know, I mean, it works the same way, and on top of that, they have, you know, they have this dual citizenship.
Yeah.
And it's really up to them, you know, to decide. And you know, and the funny thing about dual citizenship is that a lot of times when we talk about dual citizenship, people tend to think that like this is like, it's like the unicorn. You know what I mean? It's only one of them. You know what I mean?
One of my friends that we work with in the back just got his dual American and Palau. Well, he's been a Palauan citizen, but he just got his dual citizenship.
Yeah, and you know, and it's an old concept. You know, and even the U.S., even the U.S. Supreme Court recognizes the concept of dual citizenship as being, you know, a long-standing tradition. A lot of countries use it. You know, and even they recognize it, and so. You know, like, and Palau's a great example. You know, they participate freely in this program, right? In the way that this plays out. You know, it was negotiated by them, so it's clearly a possibility for us. But I mean, even in an extreme case, right, where we said that, you know, the Guam decided we're no longer going to be U.S. citizens. What it would mean is, ultimately, is that if you are already a U.S. citizen, realistically, the chances of you losing your citizenship, I think, are pretty low. Yeah. You know, now the continuity of the citizenship, probably a little bit higher possibility. You know, that kids born after that point will then no longer have U.S. citizenship. That's very realistic. I think. But even in a scenario like that, we have to ask ourselves, you know, that's a part of the conversation in nation building, right? Is what are the benefits of having our own nationality, right? Our own developed citizenship. And that was part of the argument for FSM, was that, you know, they just had a different perspective on it. You know, their idea was that dual citizenship weakens their nationhood. It weakens them as a nation. So for them, they felt like it was more important for them to have this national identity and to negotiate, what their rights and privileges will be with this relationship with the United States than to have, outright U.S. citizenship. And for them, obviously it's working out fairly well for them in the sense that, they still have access to these federal programs. They still are able to travel to any U.S. court freely and participate in these federal programs.
Right.
And so,
So I see what you're saying. You're holding up the example of another way.
Right.
And yeah, I'm not personally. I'm not this. Oh, we lose our passport. But I'm just saying that's like the most common fear.
Oh, absolutely.
That people have, and
Absolutely.
I'm really glad that we were able to address
Right.
that.
And I think that
citizenship.
it's a very valid concern, but I also think that it's just something that we we just have to be realistic about. What do these things really mean?
Yeah.
What does the citizenship really mean right now? I would argue that based on the things that we just finished talking about, our citizenship within the territory, it's not all that it's cracked out to be. You know what I mean? If you really want to get exercise the full potential of your U.S. citizenship,
Level up.
Yeah, you want to level up, you got to move to the States. You know what I mean? That's just what it is. Yeah. There's as long as you're in the territory, there's always a glass ceiling on your citizenship, and that's it's reinforced in a lot of not just federal practice, but also in policy. The territorial clause is real. You know what I mean? It's in writing, recognized by Congress. Insular cases are real. They're recognized by Congress. They're racist clearly, but it doesn't change the fact that the federal government views them as quote unquote good law. And so in that way, when you move out of the territory now, you're kind of out from under the rock of the insular cases. You're out from under the rock of the territorial clause. And now your U.S. citizenship is all that it's cracked up to be. But if you want to be here and you want to raise your kids here, you kind of have to live with the reality that you are a second-class citizen. And I know it sucks to say, I know this makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but that's the reality of it, Like I think it's sickening to me that that if you are a registered voter in California, you move to France, your right to vote for the president is inalienable. You know what I mean? They cannot take that from you. But if you move to the territory, you move to Guam, then it's a totally different story. I just think that's that in principle is just I don't understand how that flies. Now, one of the things that I wanted to bring up when we talk about dual citizenship is the case study of Israel. And Israel is a really interesting case study because obviously their execution of dual citizenship is one of the most commonly used models. But what I really think is interesting about Israel is that they extend this right to citizenship even to Jewish people who were not born in Israel. And the idea is that it's a part of their it's like their cultural understanding that if you are a Jew born in California,
right,
you're a U.S. citizen, you have a right to make your way home. You have a right, that is your birthright to come home. And that is the basis, that's like the fundamental basis of their extension of this right to all of their citizens. Which I think is, I think it's amazing. Can you imagine it? Right now there are more Chamorros living in the continental
diaspora all excited.
Oh, yeah.
Come here, check the mail. Your Guam passport just came.
Yeah, we're going home, guys. We're going home. It's going to be great. Think about it. There's more Chamorros who live in the continental U.S. than there are who live in Guam. You know what I mean? And granted, this is a huge leap, and
it is.
Is this a?
But then you also have to think about why they go to live in the States.
Right.
It's because
exactly
of that
what
we're
we were
restricted.
talking about. Yeah. Right. And they're doing what any reasonable human would do with the opportunity. I would say that the people who left Guam to pursue more opportunity are the people who could do it, and the people who didn't are oftentimes the people who couldn't. Granted, there are a lot of people who just kind of choose, like people like you and me who are gluttons for punishment. We just choose this existence,
Love it.
But I think that a lot of people, given the opportunity, they would take it up. I grew up with a lot. I think everybody shares this experience. We all have friends or family members who, got an opportunity to go out to the States, made themselves a better living, and it's just like, I'm just never coming back. It's not happening. Almost all of my parents' siblings live in the States,
and they're balling out there.
Yeah,
they're like Guam balling.
Yeah, they're living a great life. They're happy. They're content. You know, they have no intention of returning home. But I think that and that's what I think I love about this Israel model is that, you know, just the concept, the principle of it, that you have a place here.
Yeah.
And as a government, we are going to assert that you have a place here and that you should have this citizenship offered to you. Now, if you don't want it, that's up to you. But if you do, this is your place. You have a right to this place. And I think that that's a really important piece of the decolonization conversation is our right to this place. I mean, citizenship ultimately is your right to have rights. You know, if you are a citizen, if you are a U.S. citizen, then that's your right to be protected by the Constitution.
Right. No.
You know what I mean? And so the same thing goes for us. Like if we are to establish, you know, Guam citizenship, what we're doing is we're saying that these are your rights as a citizen of our place. And then in the same breath, we also determine who is allowed to be a citizen and who is allowed to have the protection of these rights, which is something that we don't decide right now. Right? Because it's not our citizenship and it's not citizenship on our terms. It's citizenship on the terms of the federal government. And in this case, it's given to us by statute versus constitution, which is a huge difference.
Right on. Hey, thanks for coming to our TED Talk. Dude, good job, man.
Thank you.
Really, and I think that's a great way to end our little run. I want to bring you back on later in the year and check in with you and find out what's going on with that study. And I know you guys have got a lot of stuff going on, but I really kind of wanted to end this run talking about citizenship, and really glad we're able to do it. Hey, if you know anybody out there who wants to know more about decolonization, you know, just search up the GroupChat show. We got 8 pretty solid episodes out with a lot of great information. So Mel, again, thank you, man, for sharing your Tuesday mornings with me.
Thank you.
And hey, my name's Chris. This has been GroupChat. Hasta adios.
Yes.